Hi there, Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat, and this is our 21st, where I am in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovids and Druids. So just type in your name and let me know where you're from. So hi, Matt and Danny from Oregon. Colleen, Stefan Makoba, hello. Thank you about my fire. Cindy, hi. Well, just wait for a few more people to come in. Hi, it's Hugh, I think, from Taiwan. It's lovely to see people from so far. And then Wyvern from Oz and Bordeaux, Cornwall. Hi, Becky. That's lovely. And from Buckinghamshire, Oregon. Wonderful. Hi, River. Hi, Jane. Linda from Maryland. Colleen from Yorkshire. Lisa, Donna. Wonderful to see you all. That's great. Wishing I had a lovely fire today. Well, it's very, very cold here, Jenna. Sorry, it's 2 degrees. I'm a whinger. Irish people whinge about the weather. So 2 degrees is nothing really compared to what some other people have, let's say, in Canada and in Northern Europe. Hi, Anne from Montreal. Popey from Greece, living in Bidford. Lovely. Hi, Ricky. Welcome back. That's wonderful. Hi, John from Brittany. Wonderful. Okay, and Xander. Rainy Utah. Okay, lovely. We're beginning to get snow here. Hi, Mark from Devon. Wonderful. Hi, Gail. And Gail is in Washington. Anyway, let me introduce you to tonight's guest, and we are going to Australia, the other side of the world, and I'd like you to meet Danuta Raine. Danuta, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
And I really, really have to thank you for getting up so early, because you were up before 7. It's a time I don't get up myself. So I really appreciate that your commitment to getting up so early so that you could join us here. So that's wonderful.
It's summer here, so it's quite light. So it's not sort of like, the cold and the go away, I just want to be under my feather quilt sort of feeling at the moment. Sort of like, oh, it's sunny, the birds are singing, life is good.
So this is something I wanted to ask you, because there's from Gail, Danuta, a sacred word flows through you and Eimear. He hasn't heard me. Anyway, that's lovely. That's from Gail. I don't know, do you know Gail? Ted Colfax? Anyway, a very nice start. Thank you, Gail.
Hey.
I've never been to Australia, and I've been to New Zealand 2 years ago, because that's where we first met at the Southern Hemisphere OBOD Assembly.
Yeah.
And I know we have 4 seasons here, and of course we honor the Wheel of the Year, and we've just had last weekend our online Ilmulk ceremony, and I'm very in tune with the seasons. Now, sometimes in Ireland, of course, we can get all 4 seasons in one day, but generally we know what we're talking about. I don't know how many seasons, because then I've been in Africa where there's a wet season and a dry season. So how many seasons do you have in Australia? That's one question. And how do you navigate the Wheel of the Year, given the environment in which you live?
Oh, okay. Seasons. Let's just start with something easy. Australia is a continent, and we're a very diverse continent. And so the weather kind of goes from something akin to like Antarctic sort of weather. Down near Tasmania is very close to Antarctica. And at the top, we've got tropical weather with tropical cyclones and stuff like that. And they're really enjoying those things at the moment. We've had a few cyclones this year already in the north. People talk about wet and dry seasons here, and people talk about, where I live in New South Wales, they talk about 4 seasons here, but it's not quite like that. We have what we call medium and long-term weather arcs. And so the seasons one year can be quite different to the seasons another year. I was talking to a friend of mine and I said, yeah, basically all you can say is that, winter is generally colder than summer. And she went, yes, you can sometimes say that winter is generally colder than summer because sometimes you can't.
Really?
And so, there've been whole like one of the big weather cycles. Like these cycles there's several of them. There's several, like we're very much ruled by different changes in ocean currents and the temperature of the ocean. And so there's a short one that's sort of like El Nino and La Nina, and that goes anywhere, like the one side of that can be anywhere between 1 year long and 10 years long. So you could have a 12-year cycle with that, or you could have a 14-year cycle with that. And they do things like they measure the wet and dry. You get more wet with one and more dry with the other. And then there's a longer arc that takes about 30 years one side and then 30 years the other side, where it's wetter, like where things are warmer and I think warmer and wetter and cooler and drier, but I may be mistaken. I am not a climatologist. But it's a long cycle. So the weather patterns we have now are quite apart from human-caused climate issues, and they know that it's quite apart from human-caused climate issues. Scientists have done tests with looking at the rings on trees and looking at coral formation and looking at ice samples from Antarctica to tell how the weather and what's going over here in Australia. And so they know that that cycle's like 30 years, almost 30 to 40 years, one side of it. So to live that whole cycle, you have to live your whole life, basically. If you live to 80, you'll probably see a whole cycle. So when I was younger, and we're just going into that cycle again, that the cycle that we were in when I was a child and a teenager, we're just beginning to enter it again, and we were leaving it when I was young. Summers were like walking through a wet blanket. So it would be really heavy, really wet. It would be like you could walk outside and you could feel like you're being smothered by hot water in the air. And it's not raining. It's just always the air is really hot and wet. And so that hasn't been like that. So I've tried to explain that feeling, like unless you were a kid where I was when I was, you kind of don't get that, because it's kind of particular to the area, which had about 1 million people in it, but particularly, or several 100,000 people, particular to the area and particular to the time. And so when you talk about the wheel of the year, we can, we kind of have it, but it's very much, when you walk the wheel of the year, you walk the associations of the land you're in at that time. And so those associations are particular to you, particular to the small patch of earth that you are belonging to at that time. And it reveals its secrets as you walk it. And I think wheel of the year is really good, a really good process, because it's, you can do it for a year. If you've never really paid attention, if you hadn't been a kid and noticed the fact that you were walking through a hot shower every day, if you weren't that sort of person, the wheel of the year helps you begin to understand that. So it's not so much that the seasons have to be the seasons and the associations have to be from a book, but rather you're walking and learning, and it's teaching you while you walk and learn. Right?
Absolutely. So how do you manage it? I mean, okay, you're not in that hot, humid, maybe the next few years you might get there. But okay, so it's Lunasa where you are now. So is it autumn, or is it still, are you harvesting, or because the reason I'm asking you, one of my guests, Marcus Manzer, who lives in Italy, we had a conversation how, at the autumn equinox, we celebrate the harvest. And that's what happens in these islands here. And he says, I harvest my olives in November.
Yeah.
You know, there's a certain dissonance. And I used to celebrate when I joined the order first, because I went to Africa, Tanzania every year for about 20 years. It was always at Imbolc time. So I would be doing my Imbolc ceremony with my African friends and my children empowered, and leaving out the broth breeds them in the heat, because in Tanzania, this is their hot time. And it seemed quite strange. So my environment is hot and is not Imbolc-y at all. And then I have to project, my consciousness to the Northern Hemisphere, to Ireland, where it's cold. So I just wonder how you manage that, or how you navigate that way, because I was tuning into home where you're in home.
Yeah. I'm hearing what you're saying. Well, Australia has like 3 or 4 harvests a year. We just go from one harvest to the next. We have trees that fruit 3 times a year.
Lucky you.
Yeah, not necessarily in my backyard, but no, we do have, that's why we can make so much food, because we actually, like, some places are just continually fruiting and continually harvesting. And so they do have crops that are a single harvest in the year, and they do have crops that aren't. So I am sure somewhere in Australia someone's harvesting something. And I could say that any time of the year. I'm sure somewhere in Australia someone is harvesting something.
We have a number of people from Australia at the moment. We have Trudy, who says that sometimes the winters are warmer than some Victoria days. And now we have Anastasia, Midsummer in New South Wales. That's where you are, isn't it? Crops ripen over. We have zucchini and tomatoes coming off the vine in the south.
Yeah, so Midsummer in New South Wales, it depends where she is. New South Wales is quite big. I'm about 100 kilometres, nearly 200 kilometres north of Sydney. So I'm I'm in a very, very nice place. Hey, everybody, I live in a really, really nice place. It's really lovely here. It's very temperate pretty much most of the year. And, it's lovely. And I've got mountains out the back door and a lake to the east within walking distance. So I'm very happy. Life is good. The universe has treated me well. Thank you, God and universe and everything out there, all the things. Thank you. But yeah, I think, look, I have friends that do Wheel of the Year, and they will only do it the way it's done, aligned with the actual festivals that are in the Northern Hemisphere. And then I have friends that do Wheel of the Year, and they do it the way a lot of the neo-pagans do it here. It's still a debate. It's still a conversation that goes on. And it depends on the associations that are happening in you. Why are you walking the Wheel of the Year? If you're walking the Wheel of the Year to align and connect with some, you're a first or second generation migrant, and it's helping you align and do that very slow process of moving between very different sorts of worlds, then that's a very different thing to somebody who's in the space and doing the stuff. So for me, I can be a bit schizophrenic with it. So when I do the Wheel of the Year, it could be, I'm with people who are going, no, you cannot do Lunasa now. Why? It is Imbolc. It's the traditional thing to do.
Oh, you mean while it's Lunasa for you?
Yeah, it's Imbolc for you. And they'll go, but it's Imbolc. It's not.
Oh,
yeah. So we have you can have schizophrenic schisms down here in some areas, and you just look seriously, go with the flow. Whatever the people are wanting to do, it always reveals something new. It always gives you some sort of insight. Summer is a bit different, probably, to the summer that you get where you are. I remember talking about this at some stage, that in summer, all I want to do is hide in the house. It's so hot. And we've had some really hot summers, and we've had some last year was last summer, not this one that we just had, but the one before. There were bushfires all over here. The air was full of smoke. It was like green. The sky was often like a pucey, greeny sort of color, just full of orangey bushfire smoke, and very scary. Fires like every day you'd wake up and you'd check the fire chart to see how close they were to your home. They were close. They were down the road. You know, your best friend's coming over and saying, have you got your evacuation kit packed? So that was last summer. This summer, oh my gosh, it's almost like the fairies have come to visit. Everything's lush. Everything's green. The zucchinis are the size of houses. And the crop just keeps coming. I started cropping zucchinis, I don't know, November, and they're still running now. It's sort of like, and I put like, you know, 3 punnets. Like I put a punnet of zucchinis, a punnet of squashes, and a punnet of cucumbers in. I'm still getting fruit off them. I did that about Beltane, and now in Lunasa I am still harvesting, but I've been harvesting all the way through. We cannot eat them all. There is so many. Even with giving them away, we cannot eat them all. But last year nothing grew. Nothing. Couldn't get fruit off anything. Like had to really go and buy your food in, because the garden just wasn't. We were getting good herbs. We were getting good medicinal herbs. The garden was giving us a lot of good medicinal herbs, but we weren't getting any of that other stuff. And I think that's the way you do the wheel of the year. You go, what is it? What's the wheel giving you right now? You know. But when we do ritual, I know that the grove I'm attached to, we use the reverse it thing. So we do midsummer. We just did Lunasa, yeah. But I think I still have, you know, rolling debates with people I very much love and who are very intelligent and not just stick in the mud sort of like diehards, who have reasons. They have reasons why they would do Imbolc now. They do, you know, Candlemas at Candlemas. They do, you know, All Hallows in October, like you guys do All Hallows in October and stuff like that, and they have their reasons for that. But isn't that there's like, you know, there's that thing, you know, that you know, it's a line, like we all meet in the center, and there is the shadow of the other side in the present all the time, and sometimes it's more vocal than others. So how you connect with that is okay. I think the thing is to give people permission to go, hey, it's okay if that's the way you do it for you, and if that's the way it speaks to you for you, then you need to listen to that, because it's a wisdom that's coming through your body that eventually may allow you to share something with those of us who are willing to listen. And I always want to be the person who's willing to listen to difference. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. Is that the sort of thing you wanted to, like, I walk my circle pretty much every day. I've got one outside and I get to go walkie, and I have a garden in it, and I plant my veggies in it, and it gives me food, and it tells me stuff. And, you know, when parts of the circle, like it's in a clear, flat area. So, and it's got full sun. So the whole circle has the same weather conditions, but as I do ritual and as I walk around it in a year, the vitality goes with the area. So like at the moment, the area that is really abundantly fertile and doing stuff, and course, you know, is that Lunasa area, sort of like in between north and west. So yeah. So that area is the area that's kind of doing the stuff and growing brightly.
And that's at this time.
That's at this time. But the thing is, I think that has to do with the relationship I have to that, because the land is flat, like it's just a plot of ground in the back.
Yeah, you may continue talking.
Yeah, just in the backyard, you know, it's sort of like everything there should grow equally the same, because it's like one plot, and the sun is the same, and there's no particular shading or anything over it to change the way things should grow. But it does actually have its own seasons in that circle, and I follow that. I go, okay, what's going on in my life? What's going on in the world? Where should I look? And the plants kind of say to me, yeah, we're growing well, we're not growing so well, we're doing this, we're doing that. And then you kind of get a bit of an augury for that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, I just say, Matilda says, I'm first generation Australian on one side. So I'm drawn to the Wheel of the Year, but find it doesn't match no matter how I flip the wheel. And I think that, like you say, there's something about for me, Druidry is around looking to the landscape and the sea as a metaphor for your life. So you have your internal landscape and there's the external landscape. And it's about where these two meet, regardless of where you are. And I think Trudy says something here. I couldn't celebrate Samhain if the land around me was in the wondrous growth of Bealtaine. It's the land that speaks to me and acknowledge, not what other people are doing. And I think this is what I love about OBOD, is the wealth of diversity.
Yeah, that's what I like too.
Even when you're talking about, some of your friends will correspond to the Northern Hemisphere wheel. You may do the Southern Hemisphere, or you do your own individual one, depending on what's happening in your grove outside. That there's space for all of that, and that's I think it's an individual spiritual path. It's a personal development path within a community.
Yeah.
So it allows, because you need community. We need the support. We're not isolated. And I know there are many, many solitary druids who are members of the order, but luckily, because we're now having online ceremonies, that people can actually connect that way. Somebody says, yes, here my conversation, it's with the earth. It's not an intellectual exercise. That's from Carol Nielsen. And I think it's so true. And that we have that space to walk our own path.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing comes when, you might start off just kind of walking it, not knowing where it's leading you and not being able to hear very much. And then as you continue to walk, it starts to speak to you more and more vibrantly. And it'll start to tell you, it'll tell you what its seasons are. It'll tell you what the place is. And you can hear bigger and more subtle voices, more and more subtle awarenesses of the environment. I think the thing is, when we're in community and we do something, there is an honor in allowing community to express itself the way the community needs to express itself. But when we're on our own, when we're walking the country that we belong to, not the land. We have, because there's sort of like this idea that, you can go buy your house and you own the land. But it's really very much that the land owns you and it calls you to be there. And if it does not want you, it will eject you. It will just go, yeah, you're not of this land. You need to go find the land that you are of, because you're not of this land. And it will send you along. I'm really fortunate. I've been in the area. I was born close to where I live, and I have lived most of my life in the area, the land of this country. I live in a country called Awabakal country, of the Awabakal nation, and I was born on Awabakal country. I'm not an Awabakal woman, but I was born here, and this land is the land that has allowed me to belong, and I've been in the house that I've been for nearly 20 years now. It's been such an honor. It's been a gift. It's been a blessing to be here, to have a place that, I could put my roots down and they could go deep and start to sink. And this part of my journey in my life, this stuff to do with the Wheel of the Year, it started kind of here-ish. I mean, there were Wheel of the Year things when I was younger. The reason why Wheel of the Year is important to me is that when I was younger, we didn't call it Wheel of the Year, but there were celebrations and things like that my father did. Like there was a bonfire night when you have, the 1st of November, the 5th of November, we used to have a fire. My father would build for the whole year, and then he'd tell the story. of, remember the 5th of November.
Oh.
So, and he would tell the story, he would do that and tell the story. And there would be other times. And so there was a sense that there was movement, there was a cyclical movement of the year. And, you would go to Cracker Night, you would go to Bonfire Night, you would go to these things, and they would place you, they would localize you in the passage of your life. And when I was younger, they were the Northern Hemisphere celebrations.
Okay.
And they were according to that because they were the vestiges of what had come. But there are other things that he did that had to do with things that are purely about this country. Like my father used to teach the local Aboriginal young men. He'd teach carpentry, and he'd teach things like how to make ancient Indigenous woodcraft and stuff like that. I have no idea how he learnt these things. And as I've grown older, as I've grown older, I've realised that some of this stuff is quite sacred stuff. My cousins are Aboriginal through their father.
Okay.
So and my dad was very close to his brother-in-law. There was and my dad was well respected within the community. He's well respected, like very well respected. And but I think the thing is, like, being a migrant in a country like this, and I'm a second generation migrant on my mother's side, who came out to Australia as a child migrant after the war. And I'm a seventh generation Australian on my father's side, as far as I was told. So it's, you're a blended being, and I think that that's the thing. I've grown up being a blended being. I've grown up being in communities where there are like 8 or 9 different languages being spoken, and people would understand bits and pieces of it. I know it's quite a hybridized sort of thing. So I don't really feel, when it comes to things like the Wheel of the Year, I think the land needs to speak to you for who you are, where you are. And there's honour in understanding the fact that in Lunasa, which we've just had, there's the seed of Imok. And sometimes you hear that seed and sometimes you don't. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you mentioned doing things as a child. So what brought you to Druidry?
Let's get a long question for that. Well, I'm carpenter's daughter.
Okay.
I grew up around wood, around trees, lots of animals, all that sort of stuff. I think my dad did, but my father passed a long time ago. My father passed in 2002.
Okay.
Yeah. A very young man, 58.
When was mine?
Yeah. And it was one of those things. I was thinking about this morning while I was getting dressed. It was one of those things where, the relationship had been, he was an interesting man.
Mm-hmm.
When he was astoundingly intelligent, and kind of, and a really worker man. So he was a school teacher. He taught industrial arts, but he was quite a good cabinet maker. And there's a lot of his work still around the city, I think. Like, if you go into some of the pubs and clubs, you'll find his bench work and stuff like that. Very nice work. He had the gift with timber. He had the heart for wood. His favorite wood was oak.
Okay.
And he would go around binding up old oak furniture to take the drawers out, and then he spent years making this tiny, this octagonal wheel of the year almost table with all these squares of restored oak. And just it was really beautiful. I think my mother still has that. But I think that I was doing a PhD that in English creative writing, and I got lopsided doing it because I was asked to write on family stories, and what they wanted me to write about was migrant stories, the stories of my grandparents and my mother's migration. And in that, we found things out, like we found out things that we didn't know, like that my mother was born in a concentration camp for, that was called a birth and abortion center in Germany, and it was part of the solution for not having any more Poles in the next generation. So she was helped to escape from that. With my grandmother was passed the baby basically under the wire and told don't go into the town. And my grandmother went. So I should not be alive. My mother should not be alive. And my mother's actual records are in history books with, as the example of what was happening to Polish infants in Germany.
So your grandmother should have been prevented from giving birth, but she escaped before your mother was born.
No, the birth and abortion center did abortions to the seventh month. It was a change in policy just around about the time my mother was born. The people that my grandmother worked for, they kind of hid her. They kind of, hid her pregnancy until it was too late to abort her. So what they did is they forced the women to work on the land and with poor nutrition. Okay. And I mean, when we mean poor nutrition, I mean like seriously poor nutrition, like not evenly sort of poor nutrition. And so they would miscarry, or the child would be stillborn or whatever. But mum didn't. No, like it was horrible. Look, it's a really heinous story. It's a really heinous set of histories, and in no way indicative to the beautiful heart of the German people that I know. Okay, so my dad we used to grow up, when we were growing up, my father said, but you too could have been a Nazi. Anyone can be a Nazi. It's not a particular thing about being a good person or a bad person. It's the community. It's what's happening. It's what you're allowed to know. It's where you are. And I think, we have to be humble in that. And yeah. And so it's a very difficult story. Anyway, so mum was born. This is very difficult for me to talk about. My mum was born, and it was the babies they would have about a life expectancy of maybe 3 days, unless they had been selected to be given to a German family. So if they looked German, they looked Aryan, they were kept. And so one of the midwives, and the midwives were basically, they were known as gun women, and they were the field officers, the Russian field officers, the women who, so I don't know if I'm making sense. I know that I'm chopping my words a bit. I still find it very difficult, and I wrote a thesis on this, and I find it really difficult to talk about. So the good thing from a family perspective with this is we got this story, and my mother could find out why my grandmother put her into care in Germany, why she was kept with German people rather than with her mum. And the reason for that was that if my mother had been found, she would have been put to death. She was eventually found, and they did what they call a questionnaire to assess whether or not she was of good blood or bad blood, and she was found to be of bad blood. But, people can say a lot of things about being a pacifist, but I exist because there was a war over heinous behaviour, and people from England walked into that city before my mother could be gathered up and taken to somewhere where she would die. And that's why I exist. So thank you, English soldiers who did that work. Thank you for doing that work. And thank you for coming to my grandmother and asking for her story. And thank you for being there for us, because we wouldn't, my children wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for the graciousness and the sacrifice that these people did. I mean, on the other side, like, this is my mother's story, and then there was coming to Australia and the things people went through in Australia, which was not an easy thing, and and people didn't understand. I think when you're Australia is not necessarily a easy land to live in, but it's a generous land to live in. The environment is generous to us. It is kind to us. We don't suffer. I don't know very many people who suffer bitter cold like you get in London or Ireland. We don't, we just don't get a lot of the things that I hear about in other environments. And if you actually understand the environment that you're living in, there is always something to eat. If you can, growing up, there were little yams in the grass. Like, if you wanted to have a nibble, like, if the number of times I sat with kids from class who at play lunch, and they'd go, they'd pull out bits of grass and go, and the yam would be at the bottom, so the little yammy glass, and we just suck on it. It'd be a bit sweet, sometimes a bit bitter, and chew on it. There's things on trees. There's stuff. If you know what you're looking at and you know what's there, there's always something. There's always something. And in some places there is nothing. And one of the things that my grandmother and my great aunt used to say to me is, you don't really understand starvation until you hear the children stop crying because there isn't enough to eat. And that's where they came from. Like, their whole solution to everything was, the child is crying, feed it. Just feed the crying child. They will feel better when they eat food, because there was such a prolonged period of deprivation and stuff like that. So I am so fortunate. My children are so fortunate, and we're so thankful for what we have. But yeah, so that was my mum's side. And I did a lot of work on that. It took a lot of work. I came back from Europe in 2009 after finding out this stuff. I found out this stuff, a lot of this stuff in Europe. While in Europe, there wasn't records for this. Like, the documentation for this stuff in the even in the academic literature. While there's information that is in the 1950s, like in newspaper clippings. Very few, but some of them, like the people who did this were tried at the Nuremberg trials, and they were found guilty of crimes, against humanity type crimes. But like, it's a big thing. But the research in Germany for this stuff was done by a woman called Gisela Schwarzer, and she was amazing. So I have a little Facebook group called Druid Pilgrim, and my big pilgrimage is this pilgrimage to Europe, where I went to Poland, to Częstochowa, and went to a conference there. But I got to go to Jasna Gora and, be shown such, like, the treasure. Jasna Gora. Yeah.
Just that.
So in Poland, like most people, even pagan people, will know of the Black Madonna, of the Polish Black Madonna. That's housed in a monastery called Jasna Gora in Częstochowa. And I went to a conference there because the conference was good, but also because it was in Jasna Gora, and I always wanted to go and see. I wanted to go see that site. Sacred sites are sacred, but and that's one of the things that's pulled me to it. But I went there, and it was when I was at the conference, I was told I would never find my maternal grandfather, because the man that my grandmother married, who was my grandfather, because he was my grandfather, was not my genetic grandfather. And so I was told we would never find it, and I was lucky. Like some of the Polish people there, in the academics there, were saying that they can't find family. You know, Poland is still healing after the war. They can't find all their lost people. Lots. Like, it's an understatement to say lots and lots and lots of people went missing during the war from Poland, and lots of people didn't go back. You know, hugest diaspora probably the world has ever known is World War II. And so we went through that sort of thing. So so I met this woman, Gisela Schwarzer. So I was in this town called Waltrop, beautiful town. If you ever, like, it's like a fairy book town. It has the oldest Gothic church in Germany, I think. Just this tiny little thing. And when I was there were singers from Munich or Berlin singing. They were getting ready to sing the Mass, one of the classic Mass. I think it might have even been Handel's Messiah, and they were getting ready to sing that. And so while the place I was staying in was the place that they were all staying in, so I just kept hearing like masses being sung all the time. It was so beautiful. And that if you ever come to Australia, you will learn the true mystery of the pothole, like the idea that you would have you'd be in a town where if a brick came out of place in the walkway, that it would be fixed that day. Unheard of here. Like, you know, is the Queen coming? No, it's all right. We can live with that. But it was like a picture book. Such a beautiful place. I was just so astounded by it. But that was where the camp was, and I met a woman there, and in a bookshop, and she contacted this Gisela Schwarzer woman. And Gisela Schwarzer came all the way from Dortmund to Waltrop to meet with me. And apparently I was the first child of a Polish infant survivor that she'd known of to come and see the site.
Wow. And
I've got tingles going through my body. And that was just so, like, she was so amazing to give me all that time and to explain things. And she gave me a copy of my mother's birth records, which we didn't have. And I'd asked the Germans to give it to us, but they never gave us a picture of the actual birth records. So this woman, because she'd been the scholar, she came with the birth records and she opened it up and she gave me bits of paper. So it was really profound. And I came back from that trip really quite transformed. So this was in 2009. People from Italy will know that was when you had the terremoto in Italy. My next stop after Waltrop was Da Vinci Airport in Rome, and going all the way up. I was going up to the mountains to look at another site that had to do with the work I was doing in a place called Gambarale in Abruzzi, and that is where the earthquake happened. I was meant to be staying in L'Aquila the night of the earthquake, and I'm so happy that I didn't. Because it was devastating. Like, the whole time I was there was devastating. So this really transformative thing happened. And I found out things about my family. I found out things about what my grandmother must have gone through, things that she had never been. Trauma is a really interesting thing. It's a double up of not being able to process something, but also not being able to speak about it at the same time. And so every time you talk to my grandmother, because when I started this project that I was doing for my PhD, my mother and my grandmother said, we want you to tell our story. We want you to tell the whole story, or go into it and to find it and really understand it. And one of the big problems with that is my mother and my grandmother would constantly change their stories. And as you go through this process over a period of time, like a period of years, and at the same time, I was being offered stories from a lot of World War II survivors from different places around Europe, at places where there were no, you would call them massacres today, but then it was just life, in a sense, that were undocumented and unheard of. So that whole process of finding that they change their stories all the time. And to begin with, you think, oh, they're just being a pain in the bottom, they're being difficult. But as I learned more about what trauma did, and then learned about transgenerational and intergenerational trauma, I found that there was an inability to engage with the fullness of those stories, and so they were quite lost in them and quite overwhelmed by them. So I came back from that trip more aware, but with secondary trauma. Like, I came back traumatized, and I went from publishing and doing lots of stuff to I've barely published since. And I was actually writing a lot and getting some really decent recognition for what I was doing. And I stopped being, I had a few years where I barely spoke, like this, like barely making words. And it's sort of like this very ancestral stuff coming through me. But the beautiful thing about it was, like, the discoveries didn't end. Like, the interesting thing about pilgrimages don't end when you come home. The discoveries continued on afterwards, and it took another 2 years to find out some more information. And I found, like, there was a documentary, an award-winning documentary, basically translated to Forgotten Children,
Yeah.
And a German documentary, lovely documentary. I was sent it. I was told about it. It took a while to be able to figure out how I could get a copy of that, particularly here. I found the producers of the documentary, and they sent me a copy, as is the case. And, the politics of authenticity and the politics of permissions. My mother's name was mentioned in it because they all expected my mum to be dead. Everyone expected my mum to be dead. So to have a
living,
to have someone come along and say, hey, well, no, and why is she in your documentary? But thank you anyway. I'm really thankful, because they actually published documents that ended up with me getting documents that actually had my birth grandfather's name. So that, yeah. And so, yeah, that went on. And yeah, so what happened was that it was just before my grandmother passed away. Actually, the week before my grandmother passed away, I got a cache of documents that explained to me what happened to my mother after she came from the camp. Okay. Because there was an exhibition being held in Hereford, and my mother, one of the exhibits was Whatever Happened to Danuta Raine, which was my mother's birth name. And it was about what happened to the Polish children, and my mother's records were in that. And so I was able to talk to the scholar that was responsible for that, and also to find out some information. So my mother and my grandmother, this sort of trauma causes great pain in families and great rifts in relationships that people don't really even understand. It's almost inarticulable. You can't just say, this is the thing that's caused this pain. But I was able to say to my mum, who didn't want to know this story for herself. Like, when I came back from Germany, I said, what do you want to know? And she asked 3 questions. She said, you're allowed to know everything. You're allowed to write about anything, but these are the only 3 things I want to know, and I don't want you to tell me anything else. I just don't want to know it. And I went, okay, fair enough, because it's identity shattering stuff. And but I was able to tell her while my grandmother was on her deathbed why she was put in care. My mother was able to make herself right with my grandmother while my grandmother was passing, which was really amazing. just, I think the thing is that, you know, it's been such a sensitive work, but it was really, really transformative like that. So after all of that work and finishing the PhD and being in that work for a long time, you know, I had gastric ulcers and coughing blood and, you know, all the things that you get from doing work like that. And I was just tired, and I was lopsided. I'd been in my mother's story for so long. I was lopsided. I didn't have my father's story. So I went looking for my dad's story, and I thought, well, I really need something to work on that spirituality there, because there was a lot of spirituality in my mother's story too, like a lot of, you know, going to Poland, being in the Polish spirituality and stuff like that. So I started walking. There was a group of local pagan people, and I do some Wheel of the Year things with them, and I just started walking the wheel. And then OBOD came along, and it was, I went, it has a flavor of my father about it, you know. I can smell my dad in it. I thought, this is a good thing. This is a good thing for me to pick up that side of myself that hasn't been allowed to sing. So
Sin or sing?
Sing.
Sing.
S-I-N-G. Sing. Yeah, sing. Yeah,
It's
so
strange.
No, that hasn't been allowed to have a voice. And so that walking that process of doing things and being in community with that, and I'm really respectful, and I really honor the connections and the opportunity to have done that work. And the thing that I found really, really encouraging about OBOD is that the course is a kicker, like coming from the sort of trauma that I suffered with the work I'd just done. It has been a very healing journey, a rebalancing and healing journey. And it's been a real kicker for stabilizing myself and being able to get to a point where I can do this again, like speak like this, like without sort of like panicking and throwing up and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So what, without revealing, you know, anything from GWERS or anything like that, what specifically about your Druid path has supported you? I mean, what is it? I mean, you've mentioned walking the wheel. What else is there that has actually supported you? Because there's a number of things. You think of ancestral trauma and the importance of being able to heal that. And I don't know if that's, I don't want to preempt your answer. How has Druidry supported you in dealing with all of this?
Oh, the other thing I've been thinking about is how in these fireside chats, the thing that's really impressed me is people being Druids, not doing Druidry. It's sort of like it permeates one's life. It's a realignment, you know. Just getting your feet in the dirt. You know, I knew a Russian man, and he said, like, he was associated with the Russian Orthodox Church, and he said, you know, one of the things that the Russians did for trauma is there were these monasteries, and you go to these monasteries and you would dig, and the monk would come out, like day in, day out. You would just dig in the garden, dig in the garden, dig in the garden, and the monks would come out and they'd have a look and say, are you well yet? And they'll go, no, just keep digging. And you keep digging until the trauma worked its way through you. And eventually you got to a point where, yeah, you could go back out in the world again because you had dug in the garden. And I think Druidry is a bit like digging in the garden. You know, you just keep with the process, keep with going through it. It's nicely balanced. It's not psychologically challenging. I found the bardic grade very aligning, like for putting you in the world and understanding how the world moves around you and how you move around it, and that's synchronistic sort of walk and being in the world, really grounding. I found and I know the deep work of the ovate work is very much really does help with that that very gentle process of inherited trauma. A lot of people have it. It's not like it, you know, you don't have to be, you don't have to have a mother born in a death camp to have transgenerational trauma. You just don't.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a grandmother who basically, you know, my grandmother was a slave. That's what she was. You know, they were slave workers and forced laborers. That's what they were. That permeates your family. That really goes through everything you can do. It affects the way you can think about yourself. It affects your life expectancy. In the last 4 years, I've lost both my brother and my sister, who were both younger than me. I've lost my grandmother and my father. I've lost, you know, if these things like mental health affects life expectancy profoundly, and it's not even from suicide or anything like that. Mental health just affects life expectancy. And this sort of work, it alleviates, it takes you through that process in a gentle way to land on your feet. I think it could be quite challenging if you did have a mental illness. You'd probably want to do this work with somebody, you know, like with your mental health team aligned with you at least. But no, I'm fairly resilient sort of person. So, but I found it really amazing, and I had great people around me. Had hugely supportive people around me. I mean, my bloke, Michael Vlasto, lives in Dorrigo. He's a OBOD druid. He was really supportive, sort of like, you know, stay on the line. No, do what you're meant to be doing. Are you doing your exercises? Don't go there. No. Just to no good conversations and environment and stuff like that, but just support. Yeah, support. So it's been supportive for me.
Wonderful. I don't know. And normally I ask that question. You may have already answered it. You know, the biggest challenge that you've overcome, which is probably this, is it?
No.
Let's go on. All right.
No. Raising 4 children with autism is a challenge.
Okay.
That's a challenge. In a society where autism's not, you know, everyone's a bit autism aware now. But when my son was diagnosed with autism in 1995, they were trying to diagnose me with Munchausen's by proxy.
Okay. Not very pleasant.
No. It's sort of like, yeah, we think she's got Munchausen's. And so that was affecting my son's diagnosis. He needed support. And so because nobody, like 1995, it's only just in the DM4, my son, very, very bright. He had what I called terror attacks. He would just become infused with terror. You'd feel it over him, like, you know, anybody who's fairly empathic will just feel this wave of terror go over the child. So with my son, it was terror. He would just go into terror and start screaming in terror. And, you know, you'd get on the floor. You basically start rocking him, holding him and rocking him. And then he'd flail, and so you'd have to wrap your arms and your legs around him. You just sit, and that can go on for hours, you know, just sitting there rocking him while, you know, and singing. I sang to my children a lot, like just singing to them. But there was no therapy. Like there was nothing for people like my son, because there was no knowledge yet. You know, you can't disrupt to therapy until you've got knowledge about what's going on, and there was no knowledge. So yeah, that was tricky. That was my eldest. In the journey, I found out that my ex-husband had autism after we divorced. There were stories before, but nothing that was revealed. And I remember, like, we were having to go in to see the school about something with the boys, and like a high school, something about the boys. And we were sort of he came in his car, I came in my car, and we were kind of meeting outside. And there he was. He was sitting in my ex-husband was sitting in the gutter, and he was ashen. And I just looked at him. I said, "You are so terrified, aren't you?" And he just looked at me and he went, "Yeah." I went, "You'll be okay. You'll get through this, you know." But just that thing, you know, that thing of not knowing who you are and not knowing how your life should work can be so challenging and alienating for a person. So I, you know, when I came back from Europe, I was coming back on the plane from Europe, that really long 23, 24-hour flight. And I'm there and I've got, you know, I've got music going through my head, like my psyche's pulling up all these songs that are kind of speaking to the condition that I'm in, and I'm listening to that go through my head. And then all of a sudden, I'm watching like videos, and at that moment, there was all these videos about World War II going on and stuff like that, with like people in camps and stuff, the boy in the striped pajamas and that sort of thing. And I'm like, they're kind of playing in front of me, and this is going through my head, and then all of a sudden everything goes quiet, and I'll go, "Oh, I know what's going on with the kids. I know what's going on with the kids now." And I'm reading a book by A.S. Byatt on memory, and I'm like looking at it and I'm going, I think I can help the kids. I think there's something that we can do. And so that's when that journey started. So I've spent about a decade. I came back. I went on a carer's pension. I took a year off from my doctorate. I, you know, stepped out and I did the parenting thing, the full-time parenting thing. And, you know, it was well worth it. You know, there's been such transformation in my children. My kids were never, yeah.
So what was it when you said that moment of discovering, I can do something, I can work, I can do something for my kids? What was it?
It was just like this great dropping and wave of knowing. It was like almost like the gift of a pilgrimage. The gift of the pilgrimage is somehow something drops into you, and the transformation, and it starts to work through you, and you get that point of revelation, that point of there is definitely something, this is what this is for, and this is what it's revealing to me. And so it took a long time for that to open up. So I went through that. From that, I went through a journey of really understanding trauma, transgeneration, intergenerational trauma, how that worked neurologically, how that worked biologically. We did therapies with my kids that had to do with trauma therapy, the therapy that you use with soldiers coming back from the war. Yeah. So we did different things like that, and they worked, by the way. You mean, not the kids are still autistic, but they're not autistic and traumatized.
That's right.
And so, you know, they're able to, and then like awareness practices, like all my kids are, 3 of my children are in the bardic grade of OBOD. Very good for them to walk the earth, to see them, feel themselves in the earth, to work with their emotions and stuff like that. And they do that stuff. Like, I believe that once you start, you initiate, the universe does the grade for you. You move, the way you're moving through your life is that grade. So if it takes you 10 years to do it, then that's the way the universe is moving you through doing that process. You're initiated, you're on the path. It's a pilgrimage. It's the pilgrimage of the bardic grade. And the gwers are important, but almost incidental to the path. They're almost like the markers. They're like the Ogham markers in Ireland. You know, you get to it and you can open your gwers and you go, oh, I'm in this land now. And I think that's the way it works with the kids. So they're in that journey, and that's brought them gifts. And then, but they've done really, really well. One of the things that I do hope, I am so super proud of my eldest son. Like, you know, he's like a mentor to me in some ways. He's just, my kids are like mentors to me. Like, you know, they're just so bundle of what they've got wisdom, like they've got outside wisdom, and they tell me wise things, and, you know, and I listen. Part of wisdom coming your way is being able to hear it and not worrying about who's giving it to you. But yeah, so one of the things that happened when I came back from Europe, my eldest son was at a gifted and talented school. So we have selective schools in New South Wales at that time. I think we still do. And my son was at a gifted and talented school. My son was a computer prodigy, like, no, literally a prodigy. He was installing things like Unix systems at 8 years old. Very smart cookie, prodigiously smart. And he got into this gifted school, and he was in year, because of the autism, they gave us the option that we could split his year 12, his leaving year, into half. Mm-hmm. So half one year and half the next year, just so he didn't get overwhelmed. When I was in Europe, he failed to turn up to his year 12 exams. And when I came back, it took a few weeks, but basically they were saying, you know, he's failed to do all this work. I'm like going, why didn't you tell me? He's failed to do all this work, and he can be, he might need to go to a different school. In other words, they were doing the process of expelling him when I came back from Europe. He'd been living with his dad in his father's custody, like parental custody. And he asked if he could come live with me. I have what they call army boots. They're not real army boots, but, you know, it's sort of like kick you up the bum and make sure that you're doing what you're doing sort of thing, you know, being a mum. And I said, you know, I just looked at him and said, I'm going to have to break a pair of army boots on your backside for this, like, to get this done. This is ridiculous. He had a whole year of English to do in 2 weeks. Okay. I had to take him through a whole English course in 2 weeks. And we did it. But his whole, but he came home, and I told Alexis what I'd found out in Europe. I told him what I found out in Europe. And within a little while, his behaviours changed and his application changed. A whole heap of things changed in his life. And he went from the last in his class. He doubled all his marks in his final exam. And he went from basically, no, you shouldn't really be in this school, to coming fourth in the year at the end of his HSC years. And he sort of like toward the end of the year, like, people were just saying, what's happened to him? Why has he changed? Like, we don't see this happening. And we're washing up, like in the kitchen, washing up, looking out at the backyard. And I said to him, Lex, what's happened? People are asking me, what's happened to you? You know, what made you change the way you're behaving? What made you? And he said, I had to think about what you said, Mum. And I decided that Hitler doesn't need to win the war in me. And yeah, and so I think that's sort of like revelation, awareness, support, the opportunity, you know.
I think it just strikes me, you say your children still are autistic, but they're no longer traumatized. And I think that is a really, really important piece. I was at a conference a few months back, and there was the presenter was a therapist who describes himself as autistic. And he said he looked at autism as something, as neurodiversity, not as something you suffer from. And it's around finding that key. And the idea of facing or recognizing your trauma, or hearing of it, and then realizing you have a choice. And I think for him to say, I can't remember to quote you properly, but Hitler is not going to determine how he's going to turn out. My own son, for example, he thinks he was describing himself as being on the autism spectrum. We never diagnosed him or anything, although his dad was a child and adolescent psychiatrist. But he was very, very sensitive. And when he has a friend who has a sister with autism, and he would identify very much with the way his friend's sister is. But he changed when he was 13. And I said, you used to be really sensitive about lots of things. And he said, well, I decided I wasn't going to be. It wasn't helping me. He still has the sensitivities, but they no longer control him. And I think there's something incredible about recognizing that you have a choice, regardless, of whatever you are on whatever spectrum it is, whether you're on, it's autism, whether you've experienced trauma, whether you've come from such and such a background, or whatever it is that life has dealt you, that when you can recognize that you have a choice. Now, only you can find that out. There's no point telling somebody they have a choice.
Yeah.
When you make that decision yourself, I think that is so empowering. And I'm just seeing this. There's a quote from JJ here. Just to come back, Guer says pilgrimage, so true, and the universe aligns us with the unfolding journey. And I think being able to recognize important stories that we encounter. So what you brought back from Europe for your son, what happens in the Guers, what happens as you walk your path, to recognize those markers or those events as important markers or signs in your own life for you to become who it is you wish to be. And then you're freer from the baggage that you've been born into, for example.
I think one of the things, and you brought up sensitivities, and that for me, during the PhD, Alexis and I would have long conversations about autism, because I touched on autism in the work that I wrote, and like through our journey, like our belief, and the belief of a number of people, is that autism's a part of a complex set of ways of being human that's trying to solve issues in humanity as a whole, rather than as in our own personal lives. Like there's when you look at species as a whole, if you look at humanity as a species, the species tries to solve itself in a sense, and autism is one of those solution sets where some things that the benefit of higher sensory perception or higher sensory awareness and hyperfocus is that you are more detail oriented, and you're able to see things that other people can't see and process things in different ways. And you need a different sort of organism to do that than the everyday organism. But the drawback from that is that by tweaking those opportunities, is that in run-of-the-mill things, you're just a bit too sensitive. You're just a bit too alert, a bit too aware, and so you get pinged. It's I like to look at it as a difference between a Volkswagen is a great everyday car, and a Porsche is a really good sports car, and they don't while they both can drive on the same roads, they both don't like the same conditions.
Yes,
and so. If you don't take your Porsche out and really open that engine up every so often, it doesn't do well. And if you try to do what you can do with a Porsche with a Volkswagen, you're probably not going to be able to do it. It just doesn't do that, and that's fine. It's all right to be different. It's great to be different. It's great to have a species that has many differences and diversities in it, because then we can come and solve problems and create beauty and engage with the universe in so many different ways that is really rewarding. We can hear the universe sing to us, not sin, but sing to us in so many ways. And I think that's one of the things I've really worked with my kids. Like my daughter is incredibly sensitive, and one of the things I realized is one of the problems that she faced is there weren't a lot of people like her who had grown up with her sensory experiences to be able to tell her, I understand how your body works and how you read the world. Let me teach you. Whereas a neurotypical person, you can talk about neurodiversity, but a neurotypical person goes to school and is taught by a neurotypical teacher who has, within a reasonably set of boundaries, they've had the same, their bodies work the same. They can say, well, this is how it works for me, therefore this is how it works for you. But when you get somebody with autism, this is the way it works for me. That's not the way it works for them. That's not what their body's doing. That's not what they're sensing. I had unusual eyesight. My eyesight was, when I was before I was 53. When I was
In the
back, I was beautiful 48 and didn't need any glasses at all at night. Well, I don't need glasses at night now, but I mean, I could see the rings of Saturn. I saw it like I could see the Doppler effect of the rings moving around Saturn. That's an unusual perception, but you can see, like, I'm wearing dark glasses. You asked me before. I can't handle light. I'm hypersensitive to light. No, I'm not a vampire, but I'm hypersensitive to light. And I need, like, for like any sort of like reading or whatever, I need coloured lenses. But I don't need those coloured lenses when I'm sitting underneath the canopy of a forest.
Wonderful.
So the light, when the light's different, my eyes work differently. There's not people out there. There's not a lot of people out there that can say, yes, I'm going to meet this person at school that says, yes, I get that. I understand that. That's how it worked for me. And this is how I solved that problem for me. Because they're just not, not that experience. So I think once we go beyond, this is what you do with people with autism, to people with autism going, I have these life experiences and these are the solutions for me being in the world, we will start to see autism in a different way. We will start seeing it truly as a very valuable set of differences.
Alexandra Dunn-Clark, I'm autistic and this rings true. I often say to people that once you realize you can choose to lean into the beauty and rest with the rest and let it be, it can become a very gorgeous way to be. Neurodivergence is very normal and needed for human evolution too. So, I mean, I think she's backing up very much what you said. And there's a number of comments to Stephanie, Kelly, Sepich. I absolutely agree, Danuta. I have autistic children too. The way they see the world is humbling and opens your eyes to the realities we live in and how silly they seem once you see through an autistic perspective. They're sensitive and realistic to their core. That puts how we live to shame sometimes. So, and then Trudy, knowing that you have a choice, that you can choose how to react is so empowering. You're no longer susceptible to people or events that push your buttons. You can control how you react, say or not say anything.
So I really feel, you talk about one of my, the thing that I'm proudest of. I am humbled that the universe has given me such unique people to live with who've opened my eyes in different ways. And I've been able to have the skill or the necessary talent to learn how to understand their language so that can help them learn how to understand ours.
Yes.
And I think, OBOD has been part of that journey. I've become definitely more subtle in my awareness. And I was fairly subtle beforehand, but I've become like more confident in the subtlety of my awareness. And that's really helped. I think it's really helped. And just so my youngest son, fabulous Salem, shouldn't have said that. My youngest son, he was didn't have functional language until 8, and he went on a medication called risperidone, which we think works because it's a type of dopamine inhibitor. Mm-hmm. And he was talking to me, saying that it had, the drug had changed the way he was thinking. And I said, well, you don't have to take it, but at the moment now you're talking to people. And he had a savant, like Salem had a savant skill with building things. So he from about 1.5 was able to build structures that were taller than him, with flat blocks with no pegs or anything on it to hold them. So he was like 3 years old, and he made a replica of the Sydney Tower, which has cantilevered thing, and the top of it was over his head height. Like he was just sort of like having to place blocks with his tiny little hands. So it was astounding stuff. Like he could do that. And when we were talking about him, whether or not he should continue on with the therapy, he was just sort of like going, I don't like this particular part of the change. And I said, well, you're on Earth and you're in a human body and your ideas are bigger than you. And the only way that you make really big ideas in this world is you have to gather people together who can make the big ideas with you. And so, you can choose to stay, not speaking, and choose to stay the way it was, or you have to choose to be part of community so that the things that are to come through you can come through you into community. I'm a weird mother. I was talking to an 8-year-old like that. But the thing is, it was his question. It was himself. And so he chose to continue on. And he was on what we call microdoses. So they're below a therapeutic level of dosage, really, really tiny amounts, like seriously tiny amounts. Only increased like a very tiny amount when he got very bigger, because he went from 8-year-old, 3'6" or 3'8" to nearly 6 foot in the process. But he was on it for a while, and then around about 14, 15, he came off it, and it's not ever, there's been no regression in that. Yeah. But yeah, I think the thing is, you've got to, somewhere in your life you need to figure out why it is you choose to be here. And then you need to make yourself accommodating to that choice. You need to allow yourself to become the thing that does the thing you're meant to be here for. I know sounds a bit fatalistic, but I don't know.
No, I understand that. I just couldn't repeat it back because I get what you're saying, but I couldn't paraphrase it. But there's we all come here with a life purpose, whatever that is, and it's to find it. And that notion that, well, I remember the first time I came across it, that I chose my own parents and I chose to incarnate at this time into these circumstances. And when I heard it first, I said, there is no way I chose that. So I kind of battled that notion for a long, long time. And now I mean, it's many years now since I've embraced that, not just accepted, but embraced it, because it makes so much sense to me why I'm here. And if we can make sense of the experiences that we're having, particularly the unpleasant ones, the pleasant ones are easy enough. If you get enough of those, you can easily take them for granted. It's the challenges. What's that? And I think you're, talking to your son about, this is the body he's born into. What is it that he needs to find out in order to be in that body, in this incarnation at this time? And I think when we can, it takes many, many years to find out what your life purpose is. And it's not in a straight line, and it meanders like a river. And sometimes you might encounter a dam, and sometimes you're over a waterfall or whatever it is. But it's to be open to that, I think. Then you're not battling with your existence, even though it might be hard.
Yeah, I think that's the key, to be in a place where you're not battling with your own existence. I mean, if you're not having that war, if that's not the war you're in, you can pretty much manage almost anything. You can go through most things. I know that one of the things that was important about, I was married I was with my ex-husband for 15 years. We were married young, and there were really good things about our marriage. My ex-husband's really smart man, and we were really smart together. It was a very bouncy intellectual life. It was fun. Intellectually, it was fun. But one of the things that came up, when, I got to a crossroads with him, and if I traveled with him, I would have gone in a different direction. I wouldn't have done a PhD in writing. I would have done a PhD in computer science. It's that door had opened. And it just got to a point of, the gravity of my ex-husband's life was so great that it was very hard for me to be me in it.
Okay.
I in his life, I was his support person.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? And so it's not an evil. It's just a choice. Somewhere in your life, you have to make a choice about what it is that you're actually here to do. I mean, for all the pain that the work that I did almost immediately subsequently to my divorce, for all the pain of that, am I happy I did that path? Oh, gosh, I wake up some mornings and I go, do I have to be in this body today? I don't want to be in this body today. Can I, and then I go sit down and, in some grass and stuff like go, okay, well, the grass is here today and the flowers are here today and the birds are singing today. So, yeah, I suppose I'm in this body today. But, yeah, but for all of that, I would not have found out about my mother if I'd done the other path. I would not have found out this story if I'd done the other path. And it's likely that my children wouldn't be doing the things that they're doing, which I can see, like in the immediate and in the long term, will be very beneficial to our societies if I had taken that other path. So it was a choice, but I think it was the right choice. But it's very much, you get to those points and you actually have to be aware, like, I don't believe that we have a choice in every moment. I think there are times when the universe opens up and we get to make a choice, and then the river of our life can split and we can end up in a profoundly different space. It doesn't always mean you get divorced or anything. I don't know. I was Polish Catholic. Divorce? What's that? But that movement, that path, and being grateful for that, I think, is the thing.
So you've mentioned great things you're grateful for a number of times in this conversation. Any regrets?
Regrets. I regret that I wasn't wiser younger.
Yes.
I regret not. I mean, I was born into my family, the same family that that led to my brother dying young, my sister dying young, and many, many sorrows. There are many sorrows in my family, and I was born into that, and so I wasn't always stable and I wasn't always competent. And I think it's really important, when those really chaotic energies are around you, it's good to learn how to calm that, but it's also kind of an honor to be able to taste it as well, because then you can see and you can know. You kind of like to have your eyes anointed to the goings on in the world. But might have liked to have stuck with my guitar lessons when I was young. I'm not being facetious there. I mean, like, music is such a good thing, music is such a fine thing. Better choices. I think I regret not being wise enough to sometimes make better choices. But if I'd made better choices, maybe I wouldn't have done the important things I was meant to do. So
that's always it. You never know. And like, two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Yeah. And there's sometimes you can make a choice and you can see clearly the path ahead, and others you don't, but something takes you there, and that makes all the difference. What concern, can you talk about one concern you have about the modern world?
That the future is harder for our children than it was for us. And having had a very not so easy life, but understanding that it was highly privileged. Like even working class in Australia is a highly privileged life. And I've been privileged with education. I've been privileged with opportunity. I've been privileged in ways my siblings were not privileged. Like, it's obvious how privileged I've been. But even with the difficulties that I've seen in my family and seen people go through, the fact that the problems we're leaving are much more intractable than they needed to be if people had been able to do things earlier and been wiser sooner. So obviously the same regret, had we been wiser sooner, would be great, and had we been able to activate that wisdom and actually put that wisdom in action sooner. But when you're talking about like large population groups, like the entire world, That's a really huge thing. And we also have to realize, World War II was a world war, and the trauma I'm talking about affected the world.
Mm-hmm.
The world was affected with this transgeneration and intergenerational trauma, and it hasn't worked its way out yet. So on the other hand, there's been some really interesting stuff like psychology and psychiatry and understanding the way brains work and how brains and bodies connect and how brains and bodies and minds connect, all this stuff. And, you know, in the 1920s, no one would have even thought of having a psycho-spiritual set of courses like OBOD be a mail order thing. You know,
Yeah.
There are so many benefits that come that are timely and so excellent. So, but also, you know, you have to be aware of where you're standing in that. So my biggest thing is that the world is not the way it could be, and that we're leaving it to other people to make it survivable, better, different. Yeah.
There's just a question from Trudy here, and I want to go back then because that concern leads us on. I read recently that regret is for something you cannot forgive yourself for. How does this feel for you? Well, you don't have to confess your darkest secrets, but it's an interesting notion that it's something you don't forgive yourself for.
I don't think I have. Maybe that's the work of the ovate grade. Sitting here right now, I can't think of anything like that. I mean, I've not always been a, poster child for, any sort of, church or anything, or I'm not a guru or whatever. I'm not anything. I'm just a person, like a just everyday person. So, I do stuff and then I don't do stuff. But I think, part of that whole understanding your embodiment is understanding that your body does stuff and you do stuff in your body, and somehow it has to weave itself through that whole tapestry of being, doesn't it?
So in fact, you don't have that many regrets, so that you look at those things that you could have done that didn't, but that was part of where you were at the time, and you've come through here, and now you are who you are right now because of what you did or didn't do way back. Yeah.
I mean, you've got to make amends. I've done, when you make a mistake or you've done something wrong in your life, I'm still making amends to my children for my divorce because it profoundly affected their lives. That has transformed what I will do in my life because it has profound influences on who and what they are. I'm still making amends for that. I'm still doing the work of that rip, that tear. You have to do that work.
So you don't regret the decision, but what you also recognize is the fallout from that decision, and you are making amends in order to repair the lateral damage of that decision. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, look, people can be tricksy about this sort of thing. They can expect that you should understand something or that your perception is the same as their perception. And really, a lot of the time, that just isn't the case. And the thing is, and forgiveness is a strange thing for me. Like, I don't necessarily understand forgiveness the way a lot of New Age people talk about forgiveness, or even religious people talk about forgiveness. For me, there's different types of forgiveness. There's the forgiveness I have to do in order to be in right standing with the world. But there's forgiveness that cannot come from me. It's like, if someone's done you a serious wrong, part of that journey of forgiveness is I forgive. And that usually is a very easy thing for me. It's always been easy for me to forgive people. I have no idea why. It just is. It's just one of my one of the blessings of my life is just maybe I just don't have a really good memory for being insulted. But the other side of it is there's a forgiveness that can only come from you. You and your gods, between you and your gods, between you and the world, between you and the universe, there's a work of forgiveness there when there's been an act of intentional or even unintentional, inappropriateness or or non-best path, or whatever you want to call it. And that really doesn't have anything to do with the victim. That has to do with the person that's got to make themselves right. And all you can do, all I feel that is in situations like that, is all you can do is wait for that work to be done. And just know that in time, all things are brought into the order that they should be, given the situations that are working out. I mean, that's, you can talk about that as a mystical or a spiritual sort of thing, but it's also quite a functional sort of thing. Things get back into right space, because the way of the world is that things have to be kind of, there's energies that move things into their right place. And, we don't have as much freedom as we think we do. But we
absolutely not. So this brings me to, what hope do you have about the world?
Oh, people like my kids. I mean, like I know that I am definitely not the best parent this planet has ever seen. And I'm sure the best parent in the world is out there. It's not me. And if they turn out kids better than the kids that I've got, we are in good hands. These are sensitive, insightful, intelligent, creative, talented, educated people who have a heart for the world, have a heart for service, have a heart for the dignity of others, have enough personal difference and personal challenges that they know that from their own experience what it's like to be marginalized and limited, and the grace and the dignity of communities that allow that difference to blossom and become its mature self. I mean, one of the big things about, difference and autism and stuff like that is that everybody has to grow up. And early intervention's great and all that sort of thing with helping people with autism figure out how their bodies work. But why do we call it early intervention? Why don't we just call it education? Like, we do early intervention with babies all the time. We help them crawl, we help them walk, we help them drink milk from crazy tipper cups, and we do early intervention all the time with all people. We are people that are born with our species is born with very few instinctual behaviors. We learn everything. Our instinct is to learn. Our instinct is to understand. And all we need is appropriate education. And education is always early intervention. And so my hope is that we have great people. And my hope is that there's been so much work done on being mature, being intelligent, being wise. Being wise has been done in the last few decades. The change in psychology and psychological understanding and the understanding of the self and the understanding of how to be a community, all that work. We have people that do just astounding work every day. We should be really hopeful in ourselves for that hope. I mean, of course, there are people that haven't done that work, and unfortunately a lot of those people have a lot of power. And so they're dragging their boots for their own personal thing, but they're not going to be there forever. And then we've got these wonderful, wonderful beings like your kids, like my kids. I don't have a problem with, whatever they say about millennials. All my millennials are wonderful. I don't know what yours are like, but mine.
Listen, I remember, I'm 61, so my mother's will be 85 next month. And I remember her generation complaining about my generation, how selfish we were. We didn't care. We're only about ourselves, blah, 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 blah. And then I've heard 40-year-old people in their 30s and 40s say, my God, the young people today, they are so selfish. They never done. Gee, if I did that when I was younger, I would have never gotten away with it. And I'm going, you sound like my parents. Will you stop? And I came across a quote that I think by Aristotle, where he was talking about young people, and could have been out of my mother's mouth. So I think, every generation, there's a part of every generation that thinks that the younger generation are horrible And I think maybe this feeling is mutual. But every generation has wonderful people, and every generation has awful people. And it's around. So when you think of, the powerful people, we've had certain leaders that, leave a lot to be desired. But then we've also had wonderful leaders.
Yeah.
So, that we have a melting pot of good people and not so good people. And but that still gives me hope, because I think each generation will find its own way, I suppose, of surviving and adapting. Just look at how we've adapted. I mean, I know this isn't a war. However, this is a world phenomenon, this pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, bombs are still dropping in some parts of the world for those unfortunate people living there. We're not. We're very, very lucky that all we're dealing with is isolation and having to be at home. Now, that is really difficult for many, many people. I'm not trivializing it. And I think the psychological fallout of this will come to bear in a few years' time. But somehow we're learning to adapt. We do things online. We're having conversations. We wouldn't be having this. Well, maybe it might have happened. I don't know. But this has made it so much easier that it's like screen time is part of my day, when before it was going to the computer to write something or check an email. Now it's much, much more. This is how I communicate with people. So I think we will adapt. Before we finish, what will you not compromise on? Like, what for you is non-negotiable?
Oh gosh.
And I really, really wanted to throw that one at you.
Oh, thank you. I love you too.
Because the questions were so easy. So,
what would I not compromise on? I tend to champion others, and I tend not to compromise on my loved ones being attacked, or people that I know. Like, I understand marginalization, and you can throw a stone at me. Go ahead. My mother was in a death camp. Keep throwing them. I don't care. But I mean, I'm happy to stand in the way of a stone being thrown at someone else. I'm happy just to go, all right, I know you're going to throw this shite at somebody. This person is inside the grace of my environment. They've come into my circle. They're in my household. They're in my community, and that's an inappropriate thing for you to throw. And I will stand there, and you can throw it at both of us, or you can just throw it at me. I don't care, because you can't. When craziness happens, you can't help it. All you can do is endure it, and try and be peaceful in it. Just try and find the peace inside the storm. I suppose that's one of the things of growing up in the heritage that I've had. It's always been, there's always been a chaotic vortex somewhere nearby. Somebody's always had serious, and I mean, not making messes in their own lives, but the world, like the energies of the world, are still working through their lives. The inherited stuffs of bad things that have happened to people in their line are still working through them. Like, they're still in that thing. And sometimes you just need to stand in the vortex with them. And sometimes you actually have to stand in the actual storm so that they can endure. Mm-hmm. And is that the sort of thing you're asking?
I was just wondering, because people, have their bottom line that there's certain things, and yours is protecting people. And I understand that. I'm a pacifist, or I like to think I'm a pacifist. And it's really interesting when you said that because of the Second World War, you're still alive. And it's that paradox. And I mean, I am a pacifist by nature. I'm feisty, but with my size, I'm not going to attack anybody. But if somebody attacked my children, oh my God, I'd fight. So my pacifism is conditional, and I'm always afraid to say, well, what will I not compromise on? One was no smoking in my house, and I wouldn't compromise on. I'm not going into this because this is your interview. This is your story, not mine. I know there's certain things, but then sometimes I'm afraid I will not compromise on inner peace, and then my daughter crashes my car, and then my inner peace has gone out the window because I'm screeching like a bat, like a Kalyuk. So we have principles, and then I will not compromise on this. I want to stand firm until you're really challenged. But I know one, I would protect my children.
So in saying that, I can say that because I have been in that space, and I've been in that space repetitively for different people over many years. And so I know that. So when you say, what will you not compromise on? I can go, yeah, in these situations, I don't compromise there. I don't compromise on being a shield. I may not result in me like going forward with a sword or anything like that, but I will stand there. I will stand there and support. I will stand there and take the blows. Life is long. Life is long. Life is always. Is this a universe where life is unusual, or is this a universe where life is normal? I think this is a universe where life is normal, and therefore life is. And I think intelligence is a thing that is normal, that all living things have an intelligence. And so I think that life is, and all things are intelligent. And when people are in pain, or when they're in, when intelligence are unbalanced, when your embodiment is not attuned, when you're not appropriately embodied for the environment that you're in, all sorts of things can happen. And I don't judge people. I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not a psychiatrist, and I don't need to diagnose your condition. All I have to do is know that action is happening, and therefore I stand here for that action, or something's happening, and therefore the optimal thing for whatever's going on is to, sometimes you stand obviously, and sometimes you just stand back, and you just don't try your best not to inflame things or not to cause awful things to occur. But sometimes there are no good decisions. Like sometimes everything that you do, whatever's going on, whatever the energies in the universe are going on, whatever is going on in the community, sometimes things become inflamed and you don't know why. And one of the things that used to do my head in was that I needed to know why, but now I'm happy not to know why. Now I'm happy just to do the thing. And that's pretty much, I've become a lot more stupid as I've gotten older.
Isn't that a relief?
No, seriously, because I'm, a little bit smarty, but I'm really happy to be really, really like stupid. I'm really happy to be, have limited. There's lots of different types of intelligence, and I'd rather be aware of the intelligence of life rather than trying to inflict my intelligence on it. Wow, that's almost sounding wise or crappy. I'm like going, is that coming out of me? But yeah, I'd rather be that way, I think. At least today I would.
I think recognizing that you don't have to be smart lets you off the hook, as in not let you off the hook of integrity, but it takes the pressure off. All you have to be is yourself. So you don't have to put on a performance, and you don't have to be that clever. Before we finish, there's a few, there's something from Kate Wood Pahuru. Hold on a second now. This is about regret. We're going back a little bit. To me, regret is an acknowledgement of growth and the fact that we recognize that. If we could do it again, we would do it in a different way. It is a reminder that we're human, and in our humanity, we have the opportunity to learn from our mistakes and grow in wisdom. I do not think that we need to forgive ourselves for being human. Instead, we need to embrace the lesson. Now, that's interesting. Yeah. Make right what we can do to others that may be affected, and do our best not to walk down that same path again. And I think, I think that I really, really get. I came across this notion of forgiveness years ago. Is that forgiving somebody is relinquishing the hold the pain has on you, or that event has on you. It doesn't say it's okay, you did it, but I'm not going to nurture this wound and keep it in me. I'm going to let the wound go. I may never forget it, but it no longer has that hold on me. A bit like what your son said, I'm not going to let Hitler determine who I am. Now there's somebody else. Pauline says, extremely interesting discussion tonight. Thank you, Eimear and Danuta. So can relate to lots you've had to share. Peace to you both and your children. This is Alexandra. Oh, this conversation is so deeply nourishing. Thank you both. And then something from Trudy, Moondas and Richard. I've always found you to be very supportive, Danuta. So thank you for not compromising your integrity. That is really nice.
It's lovely. I mean, that's so nice.
That's the thing to say. So wonderful thoughts and stories, Danuta. You're an amazing person. Absolutely. So blessings, priceless wisdom. So, you know, despite your not so clever and getting stupider as you get older, the wisdom is kind of easing out or sneaking out. Danuta, as you spoke of your children protecting and nurturing, 2 wolves walked through the field out back. Oh my goodness. We don't have wolves in Ireland. They both turned and looked when you spoke of defending your children. They walked into the woods. Thank you for sharing yourself. I mean, those
you said that. Like, thank you. Like, thank you.
Gail Ted Colfax. And I don't know where Gail is. She may have said it earlier, but I can't remember. And then Wyvern, great conversation. So revelatory. I hope I've said that properly. So, Danuta, it has just been another wonderful fireside chat for me. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your story, your heart, your emotion. It's been, as all of these stories, somebody's howling at the new moon right now. We've a new moon here tonight, or dark moon tonight. So it's just been absolutely wonderful talking to you. So thank you so much. And just hang on there, and I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody here. So everybody, thank you so much for being here and for your wonderful comments. And again, Danuta and I will look at the comments. So it's so lovely to have you here, and I look forward to seeing you next Thursday for another fireside chat with another very, very interesting guest. So in the meantime, slán go fóill, and good night or good morning wherever you are. So slán go fóill.